I'm Danielle Parody, and this is The Place That Thaws. I am back in the big city. After a whirlwind trip to Grise Fjord, we take a series of flights back to Iqaluit. To help me feel at home, Trevor takes me to a Southern-style cafe. We had lunch with a few journalists, and we talk about the trip and some logistical issues in the north.
Okay, yeah.
I'm guessing now you can tell that there is a bit of a theme here. Here's Jeff Peltier from Nunavut News.
I can't imagine the route to get mail up to Grise Fjord because it probably has to go through, at least through here to get there. Here there's an Amazon hub, and it's where a lot of people get cheaper groceries. I drink a lot of sparkling water. A 12-pack of bubbly on Amazon, if you're willing to wait up to 10 days, is like $5.50 for a 12-pack. At North Mart, they dropped the price from $37 to $32 for a 12-pack. 32. And that's about the same for a 12-pack of beer.
Like Jeff, I also enjoy sparkling water. But back home in Edmonton, the price is around $7 for a case. Grocery prices are always on people's minds here in the north. But the big story in town at that particular point is a massive container spill where almost 24 sea cans fell into the water near Iqaluit. At least some of the containers contained orders for the local beer store. The locals have jokingly started calling the spill site Molson Bay. But the water is no joke in Iqaluit. The city has been in a multi-year crisis for several reasons. In 2021, residents started to complain about a fuel smell in the water. Kent Driscoll, then APTN's Iqaluit reporter, explains.
Iqaluit was under a do-not-consume order from early October until mid-December because fuel had been discovered in the water system. Starting in the middle of January, some residents smelled fuel in the water again. The city testing confirmed a small amount of fuel, well below federal guidelines, and decided to bypass the tank where they figured the fuel's getting in. So now we're getting water in the
That same Kent Driscoll is now the communications manager for the city of Iqaluit. He says that the water situation is no longer in an immediate crisis. There's no fuel in the water, and Iqaluit has now one of the most extensive water testing regimes in the country. But Kent says that the remaining problems are aging infrastructure and a lack of capacity at the water reservoir. The federal government has given the city $214 million to help address these issues. It may not be directly climate change, but that investment in the north is crucial for its survival.
I don't know that. All I know is that they're below us today.
While in town, Trevor and I took the chance to speak to Paul Okalik. Paul works as a lead specialist in the Arctic for the World Wildlife Fund, but he was also the first premier of Nunavut. I asked Paul about my favorite subject here in the north, man-made climate change.
In your work or in your life here as somebody who's lived here a long time, have you observed a lot of changes?
Many changes, like where I grew up in Panutok. I love my hockey, and we were surrounded by mountains when I was young. And when I was young, we didn't have an arena, so there was no ponds to skate or play hockey. So the sea ice was the best ice that we could access when I was growing up. And I remember skating in October, playing hockey on the sea ice. Today, you can't do that anywhere near the sea ice. So that's a change that you can see firsthand. In my travels with my work in Senagaya, just northwest of here, They were trying to ask us what's going on with our lake where we get our fish. It's not flowing very hard. So the fish are struggling to go back up to the lake in the fall. And so I gave it some thought and realized that the lake is opening up earlier. The river's, what used to be a creek, is flowing longer. So because the ice is freezing up later, so it's draining out the lake a bit. So it's turning into a stream as opposed to a creek where the river, where the fish could go back to their lake in the fall. So that's one of the symptoms of climate change. That is unfortunately a causation that one can put together. We also see erosion of our coastline because the ice is forming later. So the fall winds are eroding the shoreline, like here in Iqaluit, for example, that we see with some homeowners here. So those are some symptoms of climate change that are readily accessible, unfortunately, today.
With shore erosion, are you seeing that everywhere from the high Arctic down here to the subarctic?
I would say it's more in places where people live, but I'm sure there's other places. But it depends on the shoreline. Like if it's hard rock, bedrock, it's not. But where a softer shoreline, then yeah, you can visibly see it quite easily. Along with the melting of permafrost, you see, like in my hometown, where it used to be a river, but today it's a creek because the permafrost under it melted and affected up the flow of the river.
Paul had a lot to say about coastal erosion and the way that it's changing the lives of people in the north. It's even affected the way he shares his stories with his kids.
I grew up in a place where it was hard to find any body of water. And we used to go to up the hill and go swimming on a pond which was deep enough. But today there's no sign of it because the permafrost melted and it's gone. So I tried going there with my children to show them that this is where we went, but we couldn't find it. So those are some things that you see the cause of permafrost melting.
You wouldn't think like in one generation that it would completely change the landscape of an area.
Yeah, it's something that we have no control over, but at the same time, it's related to our activities on this planet that is causing all this change. So it's just a matter of time before it impacts us, the wider population, I'm sure.
As you've been walking around talking to people, we're asking this question, which here might be obvious. In Alberta, where I am, it's maybe not everyone agrees. Do you believe that the climate change that we're seeing, is man-made?
It is. It's been proven by science. Like there's a correlation with the unlimited lack of action throughout the planet that it's having an impact, our activities. And all we can do is try and help out and educate the world that this is happening. Let's try and tackle this together because it's not something that one nation can tackle alone. So hopefully there'll be some progress, more progress in the long run.
The World Wildlife Fund has a global Arctic program that lists 4 threats to the way of life in the Arctic. Those include climate change, oil and gas development, shipping, and underground noise. Paul's work focuses on working with communities here in Nunavut.
I'm not a researcher. Okay. I'm more a lead specialist for the Arctic.
Okay.
So I travel to the communities and work with the hunters and speak to them about what we can help them with and how we can help each other in trying to tackle the challenges that we face today.
When you're traveling, what's the biggest issue that people are bringing up?
It depends. Like here on the island, we are very limited in terms of being able to harvest various species. Like our caribou population is way down here, so that's an issue. When I go to other parts, like the Khdim of the West, they're dealing with development and they're trying to find ways to protect what they have left. So it depends on where we are in the territory. We're 20% of the country, so we have many different challenges here in our territory.
Yeah, I imagine that's a really vast space where you have different issues depending on the community.
Yeah.
When it comes to food insecurity. Is that something that you've been seeing more of, or has that been getting better over time?
It is an ongoing challenge. How we try and tackle it is working with our hunters, because the most nutritious and freshest food that we can access is on our own waters and lands. So we try and help them out in trying to protect what they have, because with ongoing development, the more development occurs, it tackles what we're trying to protect. It seems that our area of protection is going smaller and smaller, and these mining companies keep wanting more and more and more. So it's squeezing what little we have left. And these companies, they won't be here in the long run. They're just here for the ore. Once the ore's gone, you're gone. The jobs are gone. And the land that we have left, if it's calving grounds, the habitat that the caribou need to feed is destroyed. Like, where are they going to go? That's our food. So that's the basic question that we try and tackle with the communities, is how to protect what little we have left, so that we can still live here and feed ourselves and live the healthy life that we have always done for quite some time.
Here, we get to what I think is the central tension around the discussion of climate change. The federal government said that they moved the Inuit to help preserve their way of life. But industry and the internet have created a drastic lifestyle change, even in remote communities. Although we have spoken with people like Devin Manick and Peter Amarolik, who have jobs that allow for some flexibility to maintain traditional hunting practices, others work 9-to-5 jobs, just like those of us in the South, and that has changed the way people think about the land and what they think makes a fulfilling life. But Paul said that we also have to think of the future generations and the life that is left for them once resource companies who extract the value from the land and move on are finished. And here is another thing that's going to be exposed with the melting permafrost. According to the WWF, there are an estimated 10 to 20,000 contaminated industrial sites located in Arctic permafrost regions. These range from microdumps full of toxic sludge from oil and gas exploration, to abandoned military installations, to stockpiles of mining debris. Companies assumed that the permafrost would reliably and permanently seal off these toxic substances, so they didn't make adequate disposal efforts. But the vulnerable nature of industrial sites built on thawing permafrost came up in the Russian city of Norilsk in 2020, when the collapse of a fuel tank led to a devastating spill of 17,000 tons of diesel into the surrounding environment. Here's Paul.
As I said, those jobs are temporary. The current land use plan says 25% of the areas in the territory are for calving, caribou calving. That's their staple food. 25% is not asking much. You can access the 75% of the entire territory if you want. That's what the plan says. So I have no issue with that. But it's the core calving grounds that we need to protect so that we can continue to feed ourselves. Because caribou, tutu, is a staple part of our diet. If you get rid of it, what are we going to feed off? We can't grow food up here. So it's the most nutritious food that we can access today. So I have no issue with mining, but as long as you don't touch those core grounds that Inuit want protected. So I don't see a big difference. So mining can be beneficial in some places because it creates opportunities for citizens, as well as acquiring skills that they would not have. So we can transfer those skills, like heavy equipment operation, to water truck driving or other heavy equipment operations in the communities once they're gone. But mining is a short-term activity that won't be there in the long run in a lot of cases.
Lastly, Paul and I talked about the use of Indigenous knowledge, both in the Arctic and where I live down south, and how it's an important part of resource management.
It really strikes me that our ancestors be it down south or up north, they did a better job of preservation. Like you mentioned, not entering into calving areas, or if it was, certain fishing or trapping during certain seasons. We have all this technology, but they did a better job than us.
I must say they passed on some of those tools to us, like my parents. Like that was our summer activity when we were out of school. That was one activity that we did every year together, was to go to caribou country back home. And we were not allowed to make any undue noises, no screaming, because we were not to disturb the caribou in their homeland. We are not to leave any debris, any garbage on caribou country, bring it back home, because we want the land to be a welcoming home for our caribou. So those are some tools, basic tools that we were given. Like when I was finished eating my caribou tutu, I throw the bone to the shoreline in the ocean. My mother just scolded me and said, that caribou does not live in the ocean. You are to give respect it and put the remains on the land. So those are some basic principles that we're taught, that you are to respect the species because it has been our food and sustenance since time immemorial, and it should continue to be.
Is there anything else that I didn't ask that you wanted to say?
Well, I hope that you had some good stories that you were able to work with and share with the wider audience in our country, and I hope that we can tackle our challenges together and move forward. But as we are today, it's a never-ending cycle of trying to educate the rest and trying to move governments along when they are not willing in some cases.
As our time in the Arctic comes to a close, Trevor and I reflect on what we learned and how it came to change our understanding of the Arctic. We sat in his car on our last morning together to talk about it all. Outside, a blizzard was just starting to come in. The next day, the government was closed, along with most of the stores in the city.
Open your podcast with it was the best of times or something. Don't do that though.
Probably not.
Yeah, we're Hemingway now.
Well, we're almost finished our time together here, Trevor.
Yeah, it was great. Like meeting all these people and trying to understand like the issues.
Do you feel like you understand outside of Iqaluit better?
Yes. I mean, at least the high Arctic. It has its own little airplane system going on, and life revolves around that. Just because of like how many workers are coming in and out, and what stands out to me is, I guess, the planes, like waiting for supplies, or waiting for someone to come, or waiting for dentist or a doctor or something. Like that just really impacts people up north, I think. So Nunavut only has one deep sea port, and like those are kind of essential for islands, which is most of Nunavut. Like those are 1/3 that I think that's like the mainland. And
I have to say I was surprised in speaking with we spoke to people who were relocated when they were young. We also spoke to people who were born there. In either Iqaluit or Greece, and although it was hard, within a generation they adapted.
Yeah, like northern Quebec, they were trapping and stuff, as one of them said. Like in the high Arctic, it's frozen most of the year. You're hunting whales, you're hunting seals, walruses. It's very different from trapping on the mainland.
And yet, like, they learned. Now there's people who are experts in, be it seal hunting or caribou in their specific region. It's really interesting.
Yeah, the origins kind of make it all very melancholic, I suppose. Like when you take the whole context, and, like most of them wanted to like go back home, as like some of the older ones said, but the government wouldn't let them. Like even then, it was a temporary measure, I think. Larry said.
They said, "Oh yeah, 2 years, no problem. We'll let you go home if you don't like it."
Yeah, like they were forced to adapt, and I'm pretty sure not all of them made it. It's just a different topic, but like the residential schools, like they call them survivors. Like they survived the Arctic. Like these guys are like relocated survivors. Like most of them were living in tents when they We're sent up north.
Yeah. And it's tundra here.
The tundra.
Yeah. It's a big deal.
Yeah.
As I left town and began the plane jumping back to Edmonton, I went west to the Northwest Territories and almost spent the night in Yellowknife due to fog delays. I thought about how the high Arctic, like my own home in Alberta, is poised for major changes as the glaciers melt. In my province, we're facing a drought, and due to unseasonably warm weather, likely another big wildfire season. I was thinking about a way to end the podcast in a way that wasn't a huge downer. There are some very real challenges ahead, but there's also hope. Dr. Martin Summercorn, from episode 5, told me that despite everything, he still felt optimistic. Well, Martin, I can't leave people quite with the feeling that we probably have from this discussion. So if you have any, I don't want to say hope, but is there anything that, like, any individual actions that people who are concerned about climate change can take? Because I think it often feels like it's this thing that's beyond us, and we're kind of dependent on our governments who tend to think in 4-year cycles if we're lucky. So what can individuals do about everything, about this whole discussion?
It is a good question. I don't know if I have the best answers on it, but I certainly have a couple of answers. One is, I think we should be very voiceful, all of us, in discussions that debate the future we want. The future we want is actually a future where our children thrive, and it is a future where we can live together with nature. And that is a future that, if you just read what is being written about IPCC reports, you don't even have to read them all, is not a future that allows us to use fossil fuels further into the future. We have to go away, and we have to ask and act to get the alternative solutions that would work to bring us to that future, to put them in place for us, to ask for their establishment, to pursue their establishment, to finance their establishment, to contribute to their establishment. And I think that is certainly something that everybody can do. And these discussions have to happen. I think there's nothing stronger than a vision of the world that we would like to live in order to actually manifest the changes that we see happen. And the word that I, as a conservationist and biologist, would say to that is, such a world can only happen if we are living in harmony with nature. So we should really see how we can establish ourselves in nature in a more respectful way, in a more compassionate way, and ask for and contribute to those solutions that are based on nature to actually be the solutions that we pursue in the future, and give up the fighting against nature, conquering of nature, and the destruction of nature. And I think these are the central points for going forward and come up to a better place. And they are why I'm still an optimist after all this knowledge work that I'm normally doing.
Wind and solar power are making technological leaps, and respect for Indigenous land means more awareness about the effect of mining activities on traditional territory. But that is another story. This is the end of our journey to the north. Thanks for coming with me. The Place That Thaws was written and recorded by me, Danielle Parody. You can see photos and read more about my time in the north at our website, aptnnews.ca/theplacethatthaws. Edited by Jesse Andrushko. Produced by Mark Blackburn. You can find this and other APTN News podcasts on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or whatever podcast app you currently use. The title music is by Angela Amarillic. All of the sources for the show can be found in our show notes. You can email me, dparody@aptn.ca. If you like this podcast, please consider donating to support Indigenous news. Go to aptnnews.ca/contribute.
Hello, I'm Rick Harp, host of APTN News Brief, a daily podcast version of the nightly broadcast of APTN National News. Available on all major podcast platforms, APTN News Brief is your quick way to hear the headlines every weekday morning. Learn more at aptnnews.ca/podcasts.